Here on Freedom Watch, we often note that governments make some of their most reckless decisions in the midst of crisis. With the government of Greece facing bankruptcy, other governments have been arguing over whether and how much to bail Greece out, with only a handful of politicians like Congressman Ron Paul saying we should end bailouts altogether. In a world where the laws of economics don't change, why do such important economic policy decisions get made by the seat of the pants? Ever since the economist Keynes rose to prominence, politicians have happily accepted the idea that we can spend our way out of an emergency without clear rules that enable investors to predict how the government will act next. That sort of thinking may explain the behavior of governments and the U.S. Federal Reserve in response to the current financial crisis. Bail out the institutions that seem essential, from the Royal Bank of Scotland to Goldman Sachs. It all looks a bit haphazard to non-economists, with bailout money even going from the U.S. to 13 foreign central banks in order to increase their liquidity. But, say the Fed planners, don't explain to the public the precise details of what's going on or where the money is going, lest it cause confusion and panic and bank runs like those that precipitated the Great Depression. Plenty of confusion and panic already exists, though, with Spain financially downgraded by Standard & Poor's, while the Greek crisis remains unresolved, and now billions of American dollars, billions, may make their way through European central banks out of our Federal Reserve. Joining me now is Professor of Economics at St. Lawrence University, Steve Horwitz. Steve, welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Any surprise on your part that the Federal Reserve has even told us that it's going to be sending billions over to the Central Bank of Europe to waste on Greece?
I think that they believe that anything they say now, after everything that's going on, is incapable of surprising us anymore. That, just what, the fact that the public has kind of let this all happen, and they've taken the steps they've taken, they're just letting rip now. I don't think there's anything much to stop them.
What would be the consequences of a default? What would actually happen in Greece? Financially, economically, if nobody bailed them out? Well, maybe they could sell some real estate to pay their debts?
That's one option, right? When you have a default, really, you've got two problems. One, the holders of Greek bonds are out, right? They've lost their wealth, and that is a bunch of institutions across the world. And I think the second problem, of course, is that the Greek government now either has to, as you say, raise money from somewhere by selling off land or whatever else, or raising taxes, or hopefully cutting spending. And the kind of austerity program that they're proposing in a very mild way would have to be very, very serious. Once a government defaults, it can't get that credit rating back. It's like you and I going into bankruptcy, and people aren't going to give us the best deals on credit from then on.
There's a very, very well-known, magnificent piece of real estate on top of a mountain right across from the Greek parliament that many of us have visited.
Yeah.
It's about 3,000 years old. I can't even imagine what it would bring in a real estate sale.
Even in a depressed real estate market, that piece would do pretty well. Yeah, I don't think we're going to see that happen, or that would see that happen. But certainly, we look around the United States, we look around other countries. Governments have a great deal of assets. They own a lot of land. They own a lot of things. They could, that's one way to raise revenue. It's certainly one way to get out of the kinds of trouble they're in. But that's not a long-run solution. In the long run, it's got to be about cutting the size of government. It's got to be about cutting spending.
All right. Given the socialist impulses of many European governments, and Greece is pretty much an open socialist society, or at least they have a socialism-based society. Obviously, there's private property and there's private industry, but two-thirds of the populace either works for or is on a pension from the government. Aren't we wasting any money we send over there? Isn't this problem just going to come back when this injection of cash runs out?
That is a real danger. I mean, I think unless we had some reason to believe that they were serious about addressing their long-term fiscal problems, this, like any other bailout, you're sort of putting your finger in the hole and hoping it holds. And unless they really do something serious, it's a reasonable expectation they're going to be back asking for more, if not Spain and Portugal and all the rest.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Professor Horwitz, who's next? I mean, what other European country, or some country that uses the euro, that is subject to the European Central Bank, for which our central bankers apparently have an absurd weakness, is likely to fall or likely to see these riots or likely to face default next?
Yeah, it's not clear what's likely to be next, though. Certainly Spain and Portugal have been high on everybody's list. I think one of the differences is, or one of the, at least in terms of the riots we've seen in Greece, as you pointed out, a good hunk of the Greek population works for the government, and they have very lavish benefits, very nice retirement program, all these sorts of things, and certainly they have been at the forefront of the protests that have happened there. It'd be interesting to look at places like Spain and Portugal and see whether that sort of constituency there is as large. But certainly that's the ones that look like they're next on the list. And if you want to go down the list even farther, you can look at a few U.S. states that are facing similar kinds of problems here, in terms of being in debt and not being willing to make the cuts necessary to get out of it.
I was just going to ask you if we might see in Los Angeles what we just saw in Athens. I mean, California, the state of California is paying its bills with IOUs, which, as you know, is prohibited under the Constitution. The states have to pay their bills in whatever the federal government says is legitimate cash. Even worthless cash, but it's got to be federal cash.
That's it. And I think the difference is I don't think we're going to see riot in the streets there because we don't quite have the same constituency and the same sort of mindset of entitlement yet, anyway, that I think we've seen in Greece. But it's a major problem. And one of the issues is, as Greece was able to try to turn to the European Central Bank, whether California is going to have to turn to the federal government. And again, we're back where where are they going to get the money from because they don't have any money, and the pressure on the Fed will increase from that as well. So unless folks get up the political gumption to realize that you can't keep on spending like you're spending, and start making some serious changes, we have some very, very difficult choices to face.
Professor Steve Horowitz, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you.